Chris, I presume you've got the roll call. There's only 3 of us here.
That's correct.
Now, I'll just kind of briefly summarize the rules before we get started here. Well, you guys all know the rules. For people watching at home, we keep the cameras on. We keep the buttons muted to avoid embarrassment. And if we have something goes wrong, we've got 15 minutes to reconvene, or we are done like dinner. I'm going to ask members of committee if you've got any conflicts of interest. I don't see any. And now what I'd like to do is get a mover and seconder for the whole darn thing that's on our agenda today. If I, Councillor Celeste, Councillor Carpenter, thank you very much, guys. Chris, could I ask you to give us a brief overview of these points one by one, starting with 4.1?
Thank you, Councillor McCree. I'll defer to Julia Sipple, who was involved in the appointments report.
Oh, right. Sorry. Yes, go ahead, please, Julia. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair. So the Legislative Services team has taken a look at and reviewed the appointments policy and is recommending some changes to the appointments policy process, some removing of some redundancies, as well as putting in some information in regards to the mandatory training, what needs to be completed. Subsequently as well, there were some redundancies and overlap with Chapter 26 of the City of Brantford Municipal Code, which guides our committees and advisory committees and local boards. So some redundancies were removed from there as well, and some information placed into Chapter 26, as well as realigning potentially, depending on what comes up with 4.2, realigning and just making sure that the committees are appropriately landing where they need to. So just overall, some of the high level things that have happened. So staff are recommending the removal of the information session, which is not very well attended by members of the public for our appointments process. We've got a very good process down in regards to recruitment, and we had a very low turnout for those over the last little bit, as well as kind of guiding what our vacancy advertising would look like and pointing our advertisements to specific organizations. Some changes in regards to nominating procedure and voting. So those who have attended appointments policies, we've got, or appointments committee meetings, we've got some changes associated with that, not requiring a seconder anymore to have a name placed before them, and just being able to move the name of the nominee, and then doing one final vote to approve the names, therefore, of the members that are being placed on the committee. And then the removal of the nominating subcommittee as well. So nominating subcommittees, we find recently have been a little bit backwards in the sense that we appoint members to a nominating subcommittee, but oftentimes the nominating subcommittees are foregoing their process. So for things like committee of adjustment, the interview process isn't necessarily something that the nominating subcommittees want to do. And effectively things have been coming straight forward to our appointments committee. So the process would be a bit different in the sense that all appointments would come to the appointments committee. And if so, at the wishes of and the motion of the appointments committee, a subcommittee be struck at that time, appointing the members to it to hold interviews specific to any of the previously interviewed positions, such as committee of adjustment, property standards, energy board, those kinds of meetings that we've had, police services board, those types of ones, we would appoint them and then effectively disband them thereafter. So we wouldn't need to have 6 nominating subcommittees just waiting to be called. So as well, we've got some general housekeeping updates. Of course, there's some information in there in which we collaborated with the Human Resources Department to look at the mandatory training and putting some requirements of mandatory training in our appointments policy as well, so that members up front are advised, members of the public, that there is training that needs to be completed as being a volunteer with the City of Brantford. Chapter 26, some of one of the primary amendments, we were looking really at reducing the number of reports coming forwards from committees to committee of the whole to kind of get us some streamlined meeting processes there. So not requiring a report for consecutive years for a chair. We understand that some committees want to have that ability to roll over and change their chair, and some want to keep the chair consistent. So with the purposes of having a majority or unanimous vote, they could actually put that person in the seat. If it doesn't come up to that, where they have a unanimous vote, that's when a report would come forwards, but it would just remove that redundancy and requirement. Annual reports being removed as well. As you all know, advisory committee reports come forwards through the committee of the whole structure. Requiring an annual report on something that's already occurring and minutes that are being received is another redundancy that we sought to remove as well. So overall, these are the types of changes to Chapter 26 and the appointments policy that staff are recommending upon review and collaboration with our Human Resources Department.
Julia, thank you. Most excellent. Questions or comments from members of the committee? Councillor Carpenter? Your microphone.
Thank you. Thought I had clicked that off. Okay, Julia, on the appointments process, one thing that you haven't talked about was council appointments of councilors. We used to have regulations that council members were appointed to the Police Services Board, for example, for a 2-year term. And we had some term limits on members of council for appointment to some committees. I think police was one of them. I think there was another one, but I can't recall what that was.
So I did, excuse me, through the chair, in regards to the appointments processes that are effectively for terms, that's still guided as part of the information that comes forwards and the actual process itself. So this appointments process does not necessarily land specifically for councillors. This is for external applicants. The terms for the Police Services Board or the Committee of Adjustment being for a 4-year term, those still stand.
Oh, are they 4-year terms? They used to be 2. That's why I'm wondering.
Committee of Adjustment is 4 for the term of council because that's guided by external legislation. The Police Services Board, I would have to take a look, but the appointments committee can essentially effectively, unless there is upper legislation that's preventing us from doing so, can appoint the terms at the time of the appointment as well.
Well, that's the public, yeah. But we're not. But we are dealing with Section 26, which also deals with council appointments, is it not?
Chapter 26 is for the advisory committee or boards or local boards. So it's not specific to members of council, it's external members of the public.
Okay, thanks.
No problem.
Thank you, Councillor. I see no other requests to speak, so we'll go to the question on 4.1. Those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. So Chris, could you take us through 4.2, please?
Certainly. So through the chair, the purpose of this report is to provide some updates to our procedural bylaw, looking through 2 lenses. So first, we had a registered parliamentarian who provided training to members of council of 2020 regarding chairing certain statutory hearings and public meetings. In addition, as part of that service agreement with that registered parliamentarian, he provided an overview of our procedural bylaw based on Robert's Rules of Order and best practices. The second portion of the procedural bylaw update that's contained within this report is an analysis through the lens of the Meeting Process Review Task Force in terms of finding meeting efficiencies, and also through the lens of the KPMG Service Review Opportunities Report. Looking through the lens of trying to lean out council meetings using the tool of Lean Six Sigma and identifying process waste, and to recommend changes to our procedural bylaw that would allow for the streamlining of meetings, and also providing clearer processes that may be inhibiting the use of efficient meeting practices. From there, so the analysis portion, we have the recommendations from a parliamentarian. Again, most of these changes are just providing clarification on processes that are already contained within our procedural bylaw. And then the second part is the clerk's suggested changes, which also include housekeeping changes. I have them numbered from starting at Amendment 6. So some of the changes that we're proposing is to add a category under the order of business on the council agenda for urgent reports. Right now, urgent reports are permitted under the council, on the council agenda under a procedural bylaw. What this does is just add a category for those urgent reports to go on the council agenda. Right now, urgent reports that are deemed urgent by the mayor and the CAO are put under the resolutions category. So the addition of this is just clarifying which reports are urgent. The next one is adding additional clause in the presentations portion, permitting local boards upon the approval of the CAO to come forward as a presentation upon written request in advance of the clerk. This essentially allows local boards to come speak to committee of the whole or members of council on items that may not be on the council agenda linked to a report, but may be within the purview of municipal council. We've given the CAO the approval to do this, seeing that the city has a more formal relationship with our local boards as they come to the estimates committee on a yearly basis to present their budget. So we're talking about the John Noble Home, Police Services Board, the library. Amendment number 8, removing questions category from social services and the finance committee. Essentially, at the end of the finance and social services agenda, there's a portion of the agenda that allows for questions. Staff find that this results in informal direction given to staff that's not necessarily ratified by council. You have competing interests on council's direction, the standing committee's direction. The category itself, there's a lack of structure around what is a question. The procedural bylaw speaks to speaking limits with regards to motions. When these questions are being asked, there is no motion on the ground. The speaking opportunities would not apply to this prohibition. And historically, the questions would be with regards to the committee's mandate. However, the procedural bylaw does not have any structure around what type of questions are permitted, what's not permitted. And so we are recommending that this category be removed. We're adding an automatic disbandment clause for inactive task forces. So if a task force has not met within 12 months of being established or has not had a meeting within 12 months upon consultation from the chair, a recommendation will come forward to the appointments committee recommending its disbandment. This is essentially attributed to having a large inventory of task forces and, looking through the lens of Lean Six Sigma, we have inventory issue of these task forces who are inactive. We have a waiting waste of staff are basically managing their portfolio based on their workload, which includes these task forces. These task forces aren't meeting. It's attributing to them not being able to take on new projects. So there's a couple, different types of waste associated with this process. So we are recommending the disbandment of those inactive task forces if they don't meet that criteria. Task forces that meet on an ad hoc basis. So if the Tri-Working Council task force that deals with the school boards, that would not apply, seeing that task force only meets on an as-needed basis. We're also proposing to remove questions from the presentations portion of the agenda that's linked to a staff report. We've got some feedback from members of council. Usually, if a presentation is given to report, usually there's 4 or 3 minutes left to that presentation. It allows a member of council to have an additional speaking opportunity, especially for the ones that raise their hands the fastest. Also, looking through the lens of Lean Six Sigma, if we're looking at the process and what the purpose of a presentation is, the purpose is to provide a high-level overview of a staff report. No motions are made, no business can really go forward. And so if we look at it through that lens, questions during that portion of the presentation doesn't really add value to the process. That would be better suited under when the actual motion is on the floor. So when the motion is on the floor, those questions, to gain a better understanding of the subject matter would actually enhance that process of, getting to the end goal of having a decision made. We're also proposing a notice of motion deadline for members of council. Reports for staff are due Thursday, 9 a.m. before the meeting. This will help ensure corporate consistency. It's also going to help staff being able to provide comment and necessary feedback to these notices of motion. We're getting a lot of notice of motion the day of the meeting without proper consultation to staff. They're being, sent to certain staff members in a siloed approach. We're reducing, and also a lot of the times those notices are being waived to have heard at the meeting. You know, if once they're waived, we don't have the appropriate staff at the meeting. Staff haven't been able to really provide their insight. So there's a few types of waste that are attributed to this process: non-utilized staff talent, defect waste. So we could have a notice of motion going to council that's incorrect. It could then result in an additional meeting having to be called, which is overproduction. And so we're really trying to have a deadline so that proper consultation and information can be provided to those notice of a motion, and then they'll be included on the council agenda or the committee agenda for the public. And then Amendment 12 is restructuring the committee of the whole structure. So currently with the reorganizations, we have some commissions who have to go to COW-OA and COW-CD. We're proposing that we restructure the committee of the wholes. We will have Public Works have their own committee of the whole, and then the People, Legislative Services, and Planning have their own. And then from there, the CAO's office and the Social Services Department, the CCSD, will have the opportunity to be able to attend either or. We added a provision, the procedural bylaw, that essentially adds for enhanced fluidity between the departments and the committee of the whole structure. So staff are able to better manage the volume of the agendas. And so if there is a night where there are a lot of statutory hearings on the agenda, staff from the CAO's office or even staff from clerk's department, human resources department can have those reports come to the different committee of the whole occurring the next week. So that is just to address having the necessary people at the right place, and also to provide greater flexibility in regards to the high volume of reports going to certain committees. And lastly, clarifying closed meeting overview parameters. Currently, we are following a practice that's not in the procedural bylaw, and this is just allowing us to have it in the procedural bylaw and to set some clear parameters regarding that process.
Chris, thank you. And to clerk staff, thank you very much for spending the time and energy to make some pretty valuable suggestions with respect to more clarity and less time for everybody involved with our meetings. Are there any questions on this item, guys? Councillor Carpenter, go ahead, please.
I believe Councillor Sless got in there ahead of me.
That's all right. I recognized you first. You go ahead.
Okay, that's fine. I can understand why you want to eliminate questions from committee level. It used to be those questions used to be on the committee of the whole level. I don't really get your argument for wanting to remove questions from social services and from finance. It's the only opportunity for members of council to actually ask questions that's been asked of them to ask staff and to get a response. So we would just be moving that question to some other agenda item in the agenda that a member of council can then ask a question on that item. So I'm not sure if I agree with that. The notice of motions, are you going to then, if you're suggesting that notice of motions have to be given, the notice of motions came about because motions were actually able to come directly to committee of the whole through members of council, and the notice of motion process was designed to give staff time to comment on notice of motions. I don't want anybody to forget who actually runs the organization. It's council that runs the organization. I want to know if we're going to remove the notice of motions and make it a longer process. First of all, staff are deciding which agenda item the motion actually came forward on, whether it be committee of the whole and community development or community whole planning or operation, I should say. So are we going to establish that there's an actual clerk position attached to council, that when council members want to bring forward a notice of motion, that they direct that clerk or whoever you assign to work with other staff to develop the notice of motion for them? Currently, there is no process there.
Through the chair, would you like me to answer that?
Sure.
Yes, please, Chris, go ahead.
Right. So we're not changing the notice of motion process. We're essentially saying in order to be able to accommodate the high volume of notice of motion that are coming at us at the very last minute, and for staff to be able to provide consultation on those, that they be included with the agenda package. I could tell you that on the back end, we're developing an electronic form that once staff receives a request from a counselor to write a notice of motion, that the form be filled out. That form then gets sent to all of the senior leadership team within the organization. From there, they're able to provide comments. They're able to receive updated stats and tracking on where the notice is, whether it's draft, whether the counselor is going to provide approval, and whether it's approved. From there, that will help staff better able to kind of track these notices of motion. And essentially, whenever a notice of motion is provided, it's placed on the committee where the appropriate staff are. So if there's a notice of motion that's provided at Cal CD with regards to all-way stop signs, procedural bylaw states that it will go to Cal OA the following month. And so in order to get the right people at the right time, that's why certain notice of motion go to Cal CD or Cal OA. What has happened in the past was that we had our Cal CDs meeting before Cal OA, and that provided members of council to give notice of motion at Cal CD for their always stop signs, for example, and then it would go to the Cal OA meeting the next week. However, due to legislative timeframes under the Planning Act, we had to switch our Cal CD and our Cal OA meetings. So right now, Cal OA is the first committee meeting that members of council can provide their notice of motion. What's happening is that members are providing their notice of motion at Cal OA, but it won't be presented at Cal OA until the next month because that's the appropriate place for it.
Yeah, so then we could be actually 2 months before you get from a notice of motion to actually having some resolution to something. That's my concern.
Right, and that currently, that wouldn't change under the procedural bylaw. It's just managing the notice of motion a bit different. So if you wanted a resolution to come forward in October for Cal OA, you could certainly provide a notice of motion at council in September. And that notice of motion, council September, would then be a resolution in Cal OA. It's just managing how the different committees now, because of that switch, report to each other.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Councillor. Now, Councillor Sless, my apologies for overlooking your yellow hand. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I'll accept that, Mr. Chair. No, I'm just wondering through you to Chris. Chris, this morning we were in a meeting dealing with planning and how I guess all of that works, fees and structure and whatnot. And in there, the what do you call it? The people presenting were telling us that we should be changing our committee of the whole structure. And I don't know how that plays into what you're suggesting here. But planning hearings and that we're going to be done a little differently if you accepted the recommendations of the consultant. And maybe Heidi's going to explain all this and I won't have to ask any more questions.
So through the chair, Heidi DeVries, General Manager, People, Legislative Services and Planning. So I know that in another task force meeting, you recently heard from a consultant who is reviewing our application processes. There was a recommendation that we bring in all planning hearings into one COW. And that certainly is the recommendation of that consultant. Unfortunately, these ships are sailing at the same time. So what you have right now is a recommendation to realign the COW meetings to reflect the new organizational structure. And as the other task force considers recommendations from that particular consultant, there may be an opportunity to, again, reevaluate how we hold these meetings. But at this point, your COW OA meetings are already so full that you would have to put all of the other items from the PLSP Commission and the CAO's office onto the COW-OA meetings to accommodate a 2-COW model where 1 COW only deals with planning hearings. And so that's something at this point that we on staff and management feel that we can handle with the PLSP and CAO commissions as part of the planning hearing COW, because a lot of the reports coming out of my commission, for example, go through an HR committee, they come forward in a different manner, or real estate and legal reports often go to in-camera meetings, given the nature of those. And so if that becomes too cumbersome, then we can certainly undertake a new process as part of what's being recommended by the DAP review consultant. But that is not what is being recommended here. So it may be a 2-staged restructuring. It's something that we always try to keep our finger on as it comes to the workload of members of council, the processes and efficiencies within those processes.
Right. I'm just thinking out loud here, but are we heading very quickly into having to be forced into having daytime meetings to be able to clear up all this backlog? There's not enough evenings in a week to do all of the ward things and that type of thing that each councillor is dealing with, as well as all the committee commitments and all of those things. But a lot of like the planning ones, for instance, are typically we're dealing with the outside business world, who's probably more in tune to being in a daytime meeting they are in an evening meeting. So perhaps we should be changing the way we look at things and dealing with daytime things. When the folks we're dealing with, it's more appropriate for them to also be dealing with daytime things. If I'm saying this too awkwardly and you're not, I'm kind of all over the place here, but what I'm saying is when we're dealing with the development community, they would probably be more receptive to daytime meetings as opposed to having to have consultants and planners and everybody in the evening and pay premiums. If it was done during the daytime, that could occur, and it might straighten out our evening mess of trying to get all the things on agendas that have to get done and still keep a 3-week cycle and the rest of it.
So through the chair, there was a report that came forward about council governance and whether or not you would be moving to a full-time councillor model where you would have daytime meetings, and the status quo was maintained. We have part-time councillors, some of whom have daytime jobs, which would make attendance at those meetings very difficult. But in addition, while it may be more convenient for the development community to participate in daytime meetings, you have members of the public who hold down full-time positions who take an interest in planning matters and other matters within the city of Brantford, who attend those meetings in the evenings when they choose to speak up about development within their particular ward. So I know that there are different ways of doing this in different communities. At the time being, given the council model that we have adopted here in Brantford, which is part-time, and we have evening meetings, again, this is the next step in addressing how those meetings are structured based on the new governance, the organizational structure. That doesn't mean that that's not something that you would review as, again, Brantford continues to grow and the demands of the community change. We constantly look back to see how we're doing things and whether or not it fits within a growing community, which is what we are.
Right. I think during that debate, it was, I think, stated many times and fully understood that it's a part-time thing being a counselor, but it comes with full-time commitment. So I understand the public wants to come, and if they're in the daytime, they might be impeded, but there are a lot of cities that meet during the daytime. So their public does, I guess, what their public has to do if they want to attend those meetings. And I think the same thing would have to happen here. If we're going to try and jam everything into like a monthly schedule, it's going to get more and more and more challenging. So I'm not really sure where we go with this. It just seemed odd that we had meetings this morning that were talking about, well, you've got to change to be able to accommodate this. And now we're in a meeting now talking about, well, we've got to change to accommodate that, but the two things don't connect. So I think, as you indicated, maybe it's a 2-step reconfiguration of how we do operate. So we'll just, I guess, wait and see how it all lands. Thanks, Heidi.
Councillor, thank you. And perhaps at the conclusion of our business with this committee, at this point in time, we may want to choose not to disband, because we may be back here later in the year to deal with some of the outcomes of the red tape committee process. Councillor Vanderstal, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Through you to Chris. I understand the efficiencies associated with having the right people at the right place at the right time to answer the right questions about the right topics that they're prepared for. I get that part of it. But if the last 2 years have taught us anything, we're unprepared for things that are happening around us, and we need to have a quick response in some cases to the changes that develop in our communities as we need them. So are we still leaving the window open to a fast track mechanism by which, if something unexpected comes up, council can quickly move with staff and move a piece of necessary legislation in in a reasonable time frame, like within the day, within the week, within the month, so that we're not left holding the bag in the public's opinion of, why do we have to wait 2 months to move on this very, very important issue? Is there a fast track still open to us?
Through the chair, there is. You'd be waiving the exact same rules as you are right now with regards to providing a resolution without prior notice. I put it right in there for that specific reason, so that you don't have to waive more than one rule.
Wonderful. That's good to hear, because the public, in many cases wants to know that we respond quickly, and it's important. Thank you.
Councillor, thank you. Any further questions, folks? Seeing none, we'll go to the vote on item 4.2. Those in favor? And that carries. Thank you very much. We did, let's see, I did get a mover and seconder for everything, so we'll go to the vote on the minutes now. Can we have a vote on the minutes? Those in favor? And that sort of carries. Let's try that again. On the minutes, those in favor? That definitely carries now. Thank you very much. I don't see any notices of motion. And again, I'll thank staff for the hard work they put into this. Some very good suggestions that we can move forward to council now. And we are now adjourned. Thank you very much for participating, guys, and we'll see you soon.